Board of Equalization meeting of Monday, May 8th, 2017. Let the record show that all commissioners are present. I would inquire of the clerk that a copy has been published of the notice of this meeting and that it would hereby become part of our minutes.
Mr. President, yes, it has.
Okay. And has all the work of the local assessor been completed and all assessments entered into the assessment roll?
Yes, Mr. President, we have the work completed.
Okay. And then I would proceed to the assessor's report.
That'll be fine. I sent out the report to you. I hope you all had an opportunity to read that. Several pages had some graphs, some charts, and some other data in that. I'm going to hit just a few of the highlights off of that. The 2017 true and full valuation for the city of Dickinson is $2,836,834,219. That's a decrease from 2016's valuation of $2,953,098,587. Commercial and residential properties have a very close correlation in their valuation. 2017's commercial valuation is $1,414,020,019, and residential's valuation is $1,422,814,200. Then I'll have a slide in my presentation that will show that as well and kind of give you an idea of the numbers side by side. Our new construction was down significantly. In 2016, we had commercial new construction of $66,891,250. Last year, that decreased to $6,731,100. In 2016, we had $43,334,400 of new residential construction, and that decreased to $30,389,800. The taxable valuation, and that value that the mills will be set against to generate property taxes, decreased as well because the valuation did. The 2016 taxable valuation was $136,835,175, and then our current working taxable valuation is $134,727,640. The sales in Dickinson last year, after our sales ratio analysis was completed, we had 30 sales that we used in our commercial study. That ratio came in at 97%, so right towards the high end. We did notice quite a bit of variability in that. Properties that were undervalued by half of what they should have been compared to their sale. And then we had some that sold for half of what their valuation was, so our value was double what the sales price was. So a lot of inconsistency in the few sales that we had. Our residential median valuation came just outside of tolerance at 100.5%. And then after we made adjustments to properties, included our new construction, we removed any demoed properties, removed that valuation and made our adjustments. Our commercial our ratio at this time sits at 94.2%, and our residential ratio sits at 94.1%, so we're just shy of the 95% midline and well within tolerances at this time. With that, we'll go ahead and we'll catch the lights. We'll go into the slideshow part of the presentation. And this slide here just shows the true and full valuation of the city. And we can see here that 2017 value is down from what 2016 was. I do want to point out that our scale over here has been shortened, so it looks like a larger decrease in what was actually had occurred. Our residential market, I selected a subsection of those houses, and this is just ranch style properties between 900 and 1,200 square feet. They would also be built between 1940 and 1980 was this data selection. I want to point out that decrease from Q4 last year down to Q2 of 16. That was the big decrease we saw as oil continued to fall, and that added a lot of inventory of houses to our market. However, we had a nice little bump there in Q3 that held through the winter, And then that hard winter, we saw a little bit of a decrease into 2017 here, and now as we enter summer, we're seeing it starting to tick up a little bit. So we'll continue to watch that market and what it does. But as you can see, coming from the average last year, the median, we're down a little bit. That's reflected in that ratio that ended up at 100.5% instead of down. I think we were at 91% last year. And then that triggered that slight decrease that we gave to residential properties this year. Now this slide here is the mill rates that the City of Dickinson property owners pay. The top blue line here is the total mills that are levied to a person's property. And if we go back and look at the year 2000, we see that the mill rate, or the mill levy at that time, was $480. And as values have gone up, especially here around 2008 and 9, the mills have decreased. I think these 2 years where there was a large decrease was when the state stepped in and gave some buy downs. I think that was the school buy down here, and this I think was when the 12% kicked in. And then these 3 lines here just show the different taxing entities. The school is the silver line there, I believe. The green line is the city, and the orange line being the county. As you can see, back in 2000, the city levied just a few more mills than the county did. But here in 2016, our levy is down to 40.5%, or 40.51 mills. And just as a response to the city doing their job of decreasing mills as those taxable values increased.
Mr. Hirschfeld,
Yes.
so you're saying that from year 2002 to 2003, starting in 2003, our mill levy has gone down every year to 2016, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then this chart here is just shows other cities in North Dakota and the mills that they levy. Dickinson, there's our 223 mills that we had. We're the lowest in the state except for Williston at 186. And then Wahpeton's at 395. But this needs to be taken with a grain of salt because the values of the properties are different within every city as well. I mean, the house that we have that would sell for $250,000 may not be reflective of the same house that's in another city. So if a $250,000 house here is selling for $175,000, say Wahpeton, well, those taxes are a whole lot closer together than what the mills here show. This chart here, we're going to probably refer back to several times this evening, I think. We'll try and pop it up as often as possible, but I do want to point out that it's the same chart that's on page 10 of the report that I gave you. And like I say, I do intend on using this one multiple times tonight. But this chart here is just what I used in my apartment valuation, the data that I got back when I requested financial data from apartment owners. We have 190 apartments in parcels in the city of Dickinson. I got back 22 returns. I got a few more than 22, but 22 that had good usable data. 18 of them were older structures and 4 from newer properties. The gross income per unit ranged from $3,300 a unit to $13,000 on the older properties, from $6,600 to $13,000 on newer properties. Gross income per unit medians for both types, and the assessed value per units for both properties types or ages. Assessed value per unit medians, and then if we compare the income generating, if the income approach, if you will, to the market approach, or actually the assessed value that we have from the market and cost approach that we rely on, and how those ratios work together. And we can see that we have a wide variance in how the income played into, or how a wide difference between what a value from the income approach can be in relationship to the cost market approach. And then when we look at the median value on those older properties, it ended up at 98%, or basically right up against where we are using our cost and market model. But like I said, we'll touch upon this more. So if we can go ahead and catch those lights, please, and we'll go ahead, Mr. President, and continue on with the.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hirschfeld. Any questions for Mr. Hirschfeld? From the commission, staff? We will proceed with the, to consider prior year tax abatements that have been filed. And at this point, what is the total number of, do we have a total number for the abatements that have been filed?
At this time, we have, I believe it's 27 abatements. However, they came in late enough that we weren't able to notice them and have them prepared for this evening's meeting, so we'll have no abatements tonight. We will be scheduling that for another meeting. We'll discuss that at our agenda meeting tomorrow, and we may be holding that at next Monday's meeting then.
Mr. Kessel, is that sufficient that?
There we go. That is the plan. Thank you.
Okay. And you said how many properties were probably on that meeting?
I believe it's 27.
27? Okay. All right. At this time, we'll move into to hear from property owners.
Yes.
And do you have an assessor's overview that you want to present beforehand, or would you like them to, the ones that are on our agenda, to proceed first?
I gave an overview in the packet. I think that's sufficient for now, so we'll just kind of let the property owners come up,
Okay.
identify themselves and their properties maybe one at a time, and then we can act on them. And if there's any further questions, I can discuss my opinion on that property as they come up.
One thing we have done in the past, as long as I've been on the commission, and Mr. Altmans and Mr. Steiner can, if you're in the audience right now and you have not met with Mr. Hirschfeld or his staff prior to this meeting, I would make the suggestion to meet with them and see if they can remedy your concerns before coming to us. And you said that most of the people that are here have met with you, but there's probably a few that haven't.
I don't know of anybody who's here at the moment that hasn't been to our office.
Okay.
And maybe we would start with them so they can identify themselves and the property.
If there's anybody in the audience that has not met with Mr. Hirschfeld prior to this meeting, would you please come forward and identify yourself?
Come to the, thank you.
You're in the office downstairs, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Just please identify yourself.
I'm Landon Dinius. We got the notice that our taxes were going up for the year. When the gentleman came to look at the house originally, I was home with the sick kid, so I didn't let him in. We came in, scheduled a meeting, or we came in, met with the lady that worked downstairs. She sent out the assessor. He reassessed the value of the house, and I guess I don't agree with it. So since this was the meeting that was on our sheet, I came here to see what my next step to be done is.
Would it be appropriate for Mr. Denius to meet with you before next Monday's meeting?
We certainly can. I haven't had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Dinius. I know my appraiser has been to the house. I did speak with him a little bit before the meeting here. I'm not as well versed on this property as maybe I'd like to be. Okay. And so we can certainly.
I guess we don't have any information on his property in front of us, so.
Right, and I don't believe we have an appraisal from you or any other data, do you, other than just what he's gone and done to your house. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So I guess I'm just not clear as to what the steps that should be taken are, or what we need to do then.
Here's what I think should be taken. You have the notice of increased assessment value, not taxes, right?
Correct.
I think you said notice of tax increase. Okay,
Yes.
assessment tax. Doesn't necessarily mean your taxes are going to go up. Secondly, when you meet with Mr. Hirschfeld this next month, have you been into the Dickinson City Assessor's website?
Yes.
Okay, if you click in there and just put your street or your house number where it says house number, just put that in there, and what'll happen is all the residents in town that have that street number will pop up. And all you gotta do is find yours, click on it, and take a look at the record report in there. And that's where you can check to see if there's any differences in what is actually you're being assessed at and what you have. Example, when it was last assessed, maybe you didn't have a finished basement, and now you do. Maybe you had one full bath and one half bath, and then you put in another full bath. Those discrepancies, this is something that we're gonna look at, you know, or ask you, have any changes? If they come and do an inspection, that's what they're gonna look at. So something just to take a look at, and you know, if there's something different in there, find out what it is that's different, and we may be able to make an adjustment.
Okay. So I need to go downstairs and set up a meeting with you prior to next Monday?
That would be best, yes. And
I think that would be appropriate.
Okay.
and give us the opportunity to go over your card and let me hear your take on that. I don't know your property. I haven't been to your property.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that has not met with Mr. Hirschfeld's staff? Seeing no one, we'll proceed. The first property up is Ryan Incorporated. And we'll first, Ryan Incorporated could come to the podium if they are present. And Mr. Hirschfeld, will you address your assessor's comments for this property?
And I don't see the representative from Ryan Inc. here. These are properties that we're quite familiar with. We start with the Sierra Ridge property. We just held an abatement hearing on this property a couple months ago. And the data that I received from him, to my knowledge, has not changed since what they provided prior. We did send out an income request to them as well and didn't receive our form back. And so their data could not be used in our apartment study, and it certainly could have been used in the newer apartment, but we was not given that information at that time.
And they have two properties, am I correct? They have the Sierra Ridge and the Microtel?
And Mr. President, they actually have three.
Three?
They
Okay.
do also have a metal building as well.
Okay, the metal building, okay.
But after having worked up that GIM, that gross income multiplier, I was kind of using it as a rule of thumb, and just kind of give me a ballpark of how we were falling with the income in relationship to the assessed values. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this property because we are very familiar with it. But they're asking for, I think, a $9.6 million valuation. And the income that this property is generating results in a valuation range of 28 to 35 million. And that's based off of an 8 to 10 GIM. And that gets us very close to what the current valuation of $37.6 million is. That's not telling us anything. I don't think that we've known. We're trying to get apartment values down. We've got a few of these properties that we've been talking about over the past several months. And it just lets us know that, at least using that rule of thumb, that gross income multiplier, that maybe this property could be a little bit overassessed right now. It just means that we'll continue to look at apartments as we move forward and make these adjustments as we can. So based upon the data that we have here, my opinion is, and my opinion is going to be the same tonight. I'll just let everybody know if I've been able to make a change to a property, I've done so ahead of time. You know, there have been some property that I've made changes to, and so, you know, anything that's here, it's my recommendation to deny, and that maybe speed up me having to say that comment every time and start sounding like a broken record, but that is my opinion on this property, is we deny the request that they've made for change in value.
Any questions for Mr. Hirschfeld on Sierra Ridge or Microtel. Or the metal building.
Mr. President, since we've already been, since we've already denied the abatement on this a few meetings back, and we requested additional information, we have not received any additional information. I don't think there's anything here that would change my mind, so therefore I make a motion to deny any abatement to Sierra Ridge. And do we need this on 3 separate motions for Microtel, Sierra Ridge, Microtel, and
I think it would be helpful to do in 3 separate, since they are 3 separate parcels.
okay, I move we deny the abatement to Sierra Ridge.
I have a motion to deny the abatement of Sierra Ridge.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussions or questions for Mr. Hirschfeld? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman? Aye. Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes. Next up would be the Microtel.
Mr. President, I move we deny the abatement to Microtel.
Second.
I have a motion to deny the abatement to Microtel with a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion to deny is passed. And the last would be the metal building.
Mr. President, I move we deny the abatement to 366 26th Street East, metal buildings.
We have a motion to deny for the metal building
Second.
listed with a second. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion to deny is passed. Next up, we have properties owned by Carlos Royal. If you would come to the podium and assessor's comments. You have any comments, Mr. Hirschfeld, on this property?
Not at this time. I'll let Mr. Royal go ahead and state his case, and then I'll make my response afterwards.
Okay, I'm Carlos Royals. I live in San Marcos, California. That's just near San Diego. Okay, and I've been investing in Dickinson since we just figured it out, 1992. So I'm not a person who came here to get rich off of the oil boom. So if you check your records, and this is the first time that I've come before this board or actually ever questioned the assessments. So I looked up the guidelines for the taxes and how they're calculated, and I want to get rid of one myth right away, is that if you reduce my assessment, the city collects less money. That doesn't apply. The mill rate is where the correction is supposed to be made, not in the assessment where they're artificially held up. The whole purpose of it is that every property be assessed at its fair market value. I agree with that. I have no complaints about the budget the city has. They set it. You take the taxable amount, you divide it into it, and everybody pays their fair share, and the adjustment is made through the mill rate. And there's, when I read the code, it says that the assessment of residential and commercial property, the assessor must, there's no, it should, or any ambiguity in it. He says he must first estimate the fair market value of the property. And that's the only thing I'm here for, is to talk about my property and its fair market value. And so to get there, I'm going to go over, now he went over apartment sales in the area. I would like to point out, though, that if you read the guidelines that are put out by the state, that market data is actually immaterial if you have no market data. For instance, if there were no sales, it wouldn't make any difference. You're supposed to use the income. It says the true and full value of the value determined by considering the earning or productive capacity of the property, if any. And then you move to market data. So the order is, first, how much money does it produce? And you determine the value. And then you move to market data to back it up, or you use it if you have no income source. And then the last criteria is you take into consideration all the effects that affect that property. Those are the criteria for setting the fair market value of any and all property in the state of North Dakota. All right, so let me go through the list of comparables. I believe I sent this to you. And there are actually 12 sales that are in the multiple listings, so that's all I have access to. Obviously, the assessor has access to more properties, but I have access to 12 properties. 4 of those properties are comparable in every way, and they're fair market sales. The first 4 on the list were listed. They were advertised in every major newspaper in the state of North Dakota and offered through every real estate agent in the state of North Dakota. They received multiple offers, and the seller negotiated the highest and best price. And there was one property that had an adjustment due to condition, but if you adjust it, you'll come out, all 3 of those first properties sold for $30,000 per unit. That's the truest market sale that we have. Now, the assessor will tell you that there wasn't enough time involved, that it was accepted too early. But let me submit to you that that sale took place in October of last year, and had he waited 7 months, which brings us up to today, rents have gone down another 19.98%, basically 20%. So that seller would have gotten less money had he given it more time. It's a fallacy that you wait, you're going to get a higher price. In a down market, you want to get out as quick as you can. In an up market, what he says is true. Okay, so then we have, that's the first 3 sales. We have a public auction. That's the next one that is normally the best example of what is the true market value. Is when you have a public auction, it's offered to everybody, it's advertised, and anybody can go bid on it. And there was actually 5 properties that were put up for auction, but it's interesting. One had market value rents included, and that property sold for $30,000 a unit. There were 4 properties that, if you look on the bottom of the list, the last 4, 9 through 12, those were very suspicious, as I will call it, or had red flags. Because if you looked at the brochure, it said that they were 100% occupied and rents were 100% above market. Now, there's one thing that I do know in the city of Dickinson, is I do know what market rents are. I have 300 units in this town, and they go all the way from Century down to 12 units, little 4plexes. So if there's anybody knows what market rent is in Dickinson, you can call me. I always know exactly what the market rents are. And so when I looked at this and it was going to public auction, I checked into it, and there were some issues, and it involved the university. There was some litigation. There was a foreclosure. There was accusations of fraud. There was a lot of things that were going on with this sale, and they needed it to go away, and they made it go away. So if you look at the rents, they were 100% above market, and their occupancy was nowhere within the market range. But if you take and adjust this down to market rents, in other words, they sold for $68,000 a unit, but if you adjust it by 50% based on what the market rent really is, you come out with $30,000. So that gives us 8 sales out of 12 that are absolutely tell us, no matter how you do the math, that the market for multiple family units, these are all older units, these are the units that I own, are that same type, and these bottom four are almost identical to Silvergate, which will come up later. They're identical in size and shape and the physical appearance of them. So what that gives us is 8 at 30,000 a unit, and then we have 4 more sales. And the reason they're not comparable is they're old houses, they're duplexes converted, they just don't match. Okay, I mean, if you go look at pictures, you go pull up the information, they're just not comparable to 12 unit, you know, to the real apartment market. They're like duplex, and they're like conversion type of things, okay? And you'll notice one of them was built in 1932, all right? So you can throw out 5 through 8, and if you adjust 9 through 12 for true market rents, Dave's here, he manages about 25% of all the apartments in Dickinson. I think he will verify that when I say that if you look at their market rents, they were twice what the market was. So that gives us $30,000 a unit. Now, that's the market as far as I know, because I don't have access to what he has for other property. But if I go to the multiple listing and I look at, yes,
Mr. Royal, 36 10th Street East, Foster Drive units, are those duplexes?
what's that?
The 931 Foster, 953 Foster, 971 Foster, and 36 10th Street East, are those duplexes?
No, they're not. They're fourplexes.
They're all fourplexes.
Yeah, they're fourplexes. In fact, if you look there over to the right, you'll see it says fourplex, fourplex, fourplex. The other says duplex, triplex, duplex, and one fourplex. But that fourplex was built in 1932, and it's kind of I'd call it a hodgepodge type of arrangement, okay?
And those are,
Those
Mr.
are
Royal, those are the ones you were referring to as involved with college. Am I correct?
No, the ones that are involved with the college are 9 through 12.
Right.
Yes. And if you take and bring those down to realistic rents, which would be half of what the number is here, and you take the cap rate to it, you come out with 30,000 a unit also.
Mr. Royal, what cap rate are you using?
For all of my calculations here, I use 7%. Actually, if you bring it in, I called the appraiser who does most of the appraising here in Dickinson. He said he thought that was a little bit low due to the continuing falling rents, that there's a lot of risk still left in the market. Now, I agree with that, but I use 7% on calculating my values. If you take and bring them together, the market plus the cap rate, I mean, you know, so you try to get them to the same number, you come out with a 7.56%. Okay, so that gives us our comparative sales that I've used. So now let's go to Park Place, which is 338 First Avenue. I think you have the assessment number. And basically, I'd like to point it out this way. In 2009 was the start of the boom. And I think most people agree with that. That's the year that it started. There was some, you know, inklings, 2007, 2008, but most people, if you go read, when did the boom start? Started 2009. In 2009, this property was assessed at $323,000. I didn't own it in in 2009. I bought it in 2010. And so you know, I don't have the income for that, but I'm just telling you the assessed value at that time was $323. When I bought it, I paid $400,000 for it. And that was based on the income at that time. And if I remember right, I used an 8% cap rate at the time. because in 2009, interest rates were higher. So these are called Class C properties. The cap rate in those days was running 8 to 10%, with 8 being probably the most common number, and that's what I paid. Now, what's interesting is my income from the time I bought it till the time I sold it, not sold it, but till the assessment peaked out, is on this property, the income, the assessment went up through 2015 to $842,000. But my income only doubled. So while my income doubled, the assessment tripled. Okay? So now, if you understand how that works, if we start with 300,000 and it goes to 842,000, let's just make it easy and reduce both, and you go 300,000 to 900,000, that's a three-time multiple, because that's what it is on the others. You'll find it's close. And so the assessment tripled while the income only doubled. Now, why is that important? That's a 200% increase, okay, in evaluation as my income doubled. Now, the first year I had it, the income was $75,000, $75,597. Last year, my income was $65,663.93. So I am back to what? 2009. In other words, all the gain that I've made, I have now lost. So you've taken the assessed valuation up 200%, and the amount you want to bring it down is 16. Now, that does not make a lot of sense to me. Okay? In other words, you've assessed it, my income doubled, my income went in half, all right? So I'm back to where I started. Over a 5-year period, we go up. Now, what's interesting is that even though the assessments kept going up through 2015, when was the boom over for apartments? Because what happened to apartments is that you started building apartments all over the place. So all of a sudden, you're reducing our value just because you're adding number of units into the marketplace. So there's less demand, rents start to decline. And this property actually peaked in 2013. That was its peak earning year, was 2013. It was its peak earning year, and it's been going down ever since. So for 2 years afterwards, and Joe has said, you know, they lag going up, and we lag coming down. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Not on my property, because I'd already peaked, and you're still raising the rates 2 years afterwards.
You lag both ways. You lag going up and you lag going down.
Yeah, I know, that's what's said. So I didn't come in here and complain, but here's the problem. So now, and I went and talked to Joe, and he explained that. I said, okay, but here's the issue. You're up 200%. My income's back to where it should be. You should be down 50% in assessed valuation, because back down to the $323,000 or the $400 that I paid for it at least, and but you're only reduced it 16.88%.
All right, thank you, Mr. Royal, on this.
Okay, so that's the first one. So
We'll tackle one of these at a time here,
Yep.
so we don't get muddled.
right.
Mr. Hirschfeld, I guess if you have a rebuttal or comment?
Well, we've got an awful lot, and I don't want to get in the weeds too deep, but that's a nice thing about valuations. I mean, every appraisal, every appraiser has his own opinion. This one is my opinion, and certainly Mr. Royals presented his. It doesn't matter who you ask, you're going to get a different one. So I want to have Jeremy go ahead, if he would, and pull up that sixplex that the college sold. And while he's doing that, if we would switch over to the Roars tab in the Prairie Winds Apartments. I wanted to point something out about the income approach. And you know, when applicable, it's great to use all three approaches. That's the market approach, the cost approach, and the income approach. And they should all be checks and balances for each other. But at the top there of that page, it should show Prairie Winds 1, Prairie Winds 2, their income there. And if you see abatement numbers, Prairie Winds 1, the owner's estimate of that is $1,075,000, and for Prairie Winds 2, $910,000. Why this is significant is this is both income generated and, you know, based off the same cap rate and the income those properties generated. However, these are two identical buildings that sit side by side. For assessment purposes, they should have an identical valuation. I'm not entirely certain that the market would treat one different than the other just because it had a tenant or two less than the other building did. So I want to keep that in mind, that the income approach, you know, needs to be judged, you know, properly, not just carte blanche. Because we can certainly, you know, if we look at the incomes that we had prior and that I had on that page 10, we have some of those older apartments that were earning as much as the new apartments. I don't entirely think that the market would have reacted and said, all right, here's the cap rate for income generating properties, and I'm going to pay the same for this 40-year-old building as I am going to for this new construction because it's earning just as much money as what the others are. So we have to be very careful with just doing a straight direct capitalization of the income. And before we get into this one, another point I want to make is I don't like changing the rules in the middle of a game or a race. When I started here and we were adding value on, we followed the sales ratio analysis. Apartments led the way. Apartments had a large increase. So if I had 30 sales, it wasn't uncommon to have 9 or 12 of those, or a bulk of them, be apartment sales. And as they went up, they increased the valuation of everything that wasn't apartments. Condos, business condos, downtown office, all of those valuations increased just about lockstep with them because that was the sales ratio analysis. And as time went on, we tried to adjust those apartments, and we did, and that came about with the revaluation. And so going down, after you told the other 800 commercial owners in town that, you know, you had to carry more of the weight going up because of the sales ratio analysis, that we should now change over to just straight income for the income generating properties. And again, the other 800 properties need to carry the weight for those properties. You know, I don't think that's fair. If we look, and you know, we hope that we have a stable market that continues to increase and continues to give returns back to the ownership. Our system works very well with that. But when we have the dynamic market that we've had, when we had the increases in values, now we're having the decreases in values, you know, the system, if you leave it alone, still works out because it washes out on the way down what it wasn't able to give on the way up. So if we start manipulating that in between there, then there's going to be a certain class of property, and it doesn't have to be the same one all the time, but you know, if one of them is doing well on the way up and then it's the first one to go down, if you don't react to them in a similar manner, then somebody's going to benefit to the detriment of other property owners.
Okay, can I answer this question? Because I'm
Go ahead,
really
Mr.
glad he brought that up, because
Go
it
ahead,
was a
Mr. Royal.
point that I missed. I'm glad that he said that we have to reconcile the market and the cap rate with the income, so we want to look at both, and I agree with that. In fact, if you look at, and I include you a picture of it, is I think the address is 423 Sims, is the identical property. And if you look at the comp sheet, that's one of the properties that sold, okay? And how much did it sell for? It sold for $30,000 a unit. There are 12 units. Both properties have 12 units. They were built at the same time. They're like sister properties. If you look at Park Place and you look at Sims, they are identical. So let's bring them together.
Mr.
This
Royale,
one sold for $30,000 a unit.
do you still own these units, or are you?
Yeah, I sure do.
Okay, so you 7 years old, you're talking about when you bought them.
Yeah, yes. No, I'm talking about Sims, which I don't own, is one of the comps. When
Okay.
it sold for $30,000. I still own mine. Yeah.
Okay.
So On Sims, it sold for 30,000 a unit, all right? So from a market standpoint, Park Place has a value of 360,000. If we take net operating income, which I furnished to you, and all the data and the backup of the expenses I've furnished to Joe, but if you take a 7% cap rate, you come out $354,057. Now that's just about as close as you can get to 360 to reconcile the income and the market data, and we have 8 sales at 30,000, which are similar, and 1 which is absolutely identical. Okay, I mean it is identical. Advertised, it was put to the marketplace. Every realtor, every person had a chance to go buy it. The seller got multiple offers, and he selected the highest price, and that was 30,000 a unit. So if you take the market data, you take the income approach, you come out with $360,000 for this property. There is, I mean, you don't have, there's no rocket science to it. It's really easy. I've been doing this for 40 years. There is no question that this property is $360,000, period. That's, you know, and like I said, when the income doubled, you tripled the assessed valuation. So now that the income is cut in half, you need to come in and reduce it by that same amount, and you go right back to the 2009 valuation. I'm actually below it a little bit, and going forward, like I said, in 2017, it looks like rents are going to, or income is going to be down another about 20%, 19.98% or so, okay? And so I furnished you all that information.
Yes.
I don't know how you can, and if you, all I'm asking for is that you set my property to its fair market value, because that is the law. Now, I don't know about these other ratios that he talks about, because that is not the law. It might be something he has to balance in the back room with the state and with the city, but the law says that my property is to be assessed at its fair market value. And if it's not, then I'm paying an unfair or an unjust burden of the city's budget. And the correction is to be made in the mill rate. In other words, you adjust the fair market value, and then you take that number over and divide it into the budget. The city still gets the same amount of money. It's just that everybody pays the same mill rate, and everybody pays based on the same criteria or value, which is fair market value. Now, that's the way it's set up at the state. That is the law.
But how do you address it when the market value of a resident doesn't decrease to the same as apartments decrease because of occupancy?
Well, if you take the houses, now I just watched his whole presentation, and if you looked at it, the houses have not changed much. So they're at pretty much their fair market value. In other words, if you look at the charts, they're pretty close. I would guess if you have agricultural land, it's pretty close. But for apartments, at least mine, and I don't know about everybody else's, but some others may be here also, but I know on mine, that my rents went up, and I guarantee you, the city raised it, and when even though I had peaked, they raised it for 2 more years, okay? My income was cut in half. I'm back to 2009. Therefore, the assessed value was tripled, or that's a 200% increase, and the city says, well, we've taken you up 200, but now we're only going to take you down 16.8%. I think it's 8.8 to be exact, and it just doesn't.
Thank you, Mr. Royal. I think we've got.
Yeah, I think you've got
the
that.
gist of your
But anyway,
Yeah.
the housing market is assessed at its fair market value. Now, what happens If you change my assessment, my value comes down to fair market, and everybody pays the same mill rate. That means that everybody who's a house will pay just a tiny, tiny bit more.
Mr. Royal, I think we're
Yeah,
all
I-
quite aware of that.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, that's the status.
We're aware of how the
But
mill
with
rates
this
would have
one,
to
we
be
have a
adjusted.
direct sale with a sister property for exactly. So I'm glad he brought that up, because it reconciles with income approach, market data,
Thank
and
you.
if you take it back to 2009, it matches that number
Thank you.
also.
So I would ask commissioners if they have any questions for Mr. Hirschfeld or any questions for Mr. Royal. And then, if not, I would look for a motion to either adjust or deny an adjustment.
Mr. Hirschfeld, do you agree with the numbers shown on this page?
I do not agree with them totally, and again, it comes back to having different opinions. Mr. Royal puts a very compelling argument together. Since we're kind of setting the tone for apartments right now and the lack of market that we had, I do want to draw attention, if you will, to the screen there. And Jeremy, if you can get us an oblique look at that. This should be comparable, was it number 6 that he had? It was also one of the Alumni Association's properties that they sold, and it sold for $30,333. And when you look at direct market, and not looking at income yet, but looking at direct market, with the obsolescence that this converted sixplex has as an investor, the experience I have, and it's certainly not to the number of years that Mr. Royal has, but in my opinion, this property here is an inferior property to the 12plexes. I think it would, I mean, the location's pretty good, but I think it's, harder to keep consistently full or rent-wise. I mean, you have a 12plex where each bedroom's the same, or, I mean, you have 2 bedrooms in each one, every unit's the same. I think that just makes it easier for an investor. But just on the pure market, this property here went to auction. It was listed, for several months, and it went to auction after the first of the year. So as Mr. Royal's saying, as the market's continuing to decline, and so, the other properties had to hurry up and sell before they declined any further, this property went ahead and, in my opinion, outsold the other properties. Now, I did speak to those, the listing realtor for those 4 properties that sold.
So with our units, our market value for units in Dickinson, an average is what?
Very difficult to tell right now. We haven't had good sales. I mean, we've had the ones that the Alumni Association put up for auction, and then we had these 4 units here, or these 4 other apartments.
Now,
Now,
30,000, I don't know if, I think 30,000 is low.
and I do too. They were listed a total of 10 days. They took a contract on the 8th day. It was one buyer, ended up selling 4 properties to one seller, or I mean, one seller sold them to one buyer.
Was
And
it an arm's
That
length
was- yeah.
transaction?
It was arm's length, but it was 1031 and 8 days on the market. I certainly think they could have achieved a higher price if they'd have tried. Mr. Royal disagrees with me, but I think this property here, in my opinion, being inferior, proves the point that maybe it could have with a little additional time on the market.
That's just not true. Is properties 1, 2, and 3 all sold at 30,000, and were totally arm's length, not 4, but only 3. It was one seller. It ended up being one buyer, but it was a total arm's length transaction. I know the seller. He was under in other words, he didn't have to sell. The guy's a multi-millionaire, lives in Texas.
Is there a
He's a friend of
discounted
mine.
price if he buys all 4 at the same time? Or?
Yeah, it wasn't 4, it's 3.
Okay.
The 4th one is a public auction,
Right.
and that is the one that sold for 33,000. That was just one more that showed that the properties like mine are 30,000 a unit. Do I like that? But let me tell you something. I was here, okay, during the last oil boom bust. I bought houses in Dickinson for 16 grand, that sold for $66,000 at the height of the 70s oil boom. okay? So when the market drops, it drops. It's not, it's 30,000 is the market. Now, let's see if we can verify that. If we look at the income for this property, my property, and you use a 7% cap rate, that's very conservative, you come out with $354,000. I don't know how you can get any closer to that being market. Gentlemen and ladies, that is the market value for units built in the, like 1970, 1965, 1967. And these are 12 units, 17 units, 27 unit apartments.
Mr. Royal,
So, yeah.
I think we've gotten,
Yeah.
we understand that the 30,000 is your benchmark. You're saying this is what
Yeah.
the property is.
Well, even he says that a higher number is down here where the university sold for 68,000. But I'm telling you, go look at the brochure and go look at the numbers. They said they're 100% occupied. That's not market. And that the rents are twice what the market is. If you adjust that, you come back to 30,000. So every comp that I have for properties that are like mine, I don't know about other properties or new properties, but I can tell you that if it was built in the 60s and 70s that are like mine, the market value is 30,000.
Okay. Thank
Mr.
you.
Royal, that's what I'm pointing out. That's your comp number 4 right there.
Yeah,
That's the one that went to auction for the university.
right.
And this one's good, but the other 4 are not.
That's correct.
Okay.
I agree with that. That this one is good, and it's 30,000, by the way. He's saying that it's good, it's 30,000. The property that is identical to mine is also 30,000. Those are sales prices. Those are the market. Those are arm length transactions. I don't have anything to do with them. You didn't have anything to do with them. He did. Those are arm length transactions. They fit the definition of a fair market sale.
Mr. Royal,
Yeah.
I think we have.
Yeah, okay.
We have the definition, we have,
Right.
what we need to do is make a decision, or
Right.
we're gonna be here till midnight.
I agree with you 100%.
We need to make a decision, and if there are any questions from commissioners for Mr. Hirschfeld or Mr. Royal on any of this, and if not, I would look, we have an assessed value of $708,800,
Right.
and you were looking for
360,000.
So I would present to you, make a motion or to deny, adjust, or whatever.
Mr. Hirschfield, I mean, that sixplex we feel is a good comp to this?
I do not.
I-
And my
I mean,
opinion.
I don't think if we were appraising these on the market, you would find an appraiser that would look at a 12plex and then say, I'm gonna pick this sixplex conversion out of the blue as one of my comp sales. Another 12plex, yes, or a similar apartment, maybe a 24plex, yes. I don't know if I buy that sixplex as being a good comp. Also don't buy that just because that sale took place within 10 days, it's not a good sale. I mean, in this market, I can assure you, whoever bought that did their homework. They didn't pay too much or pay too little.
I agree with you.
I mean, so they're not buying apartments just, especially if I understand right, that had probably a 50% vacancy rate at the time it was for sale. So that buyer, I'm pretty sure did his homework on that. So I believe that is a good comp.
Again, I would, if there's no more questions or comments, I would look to the commissioners to present a motion to either deny or adjust Park Place Apartments.
Mr. President, if I will make one more point. Part of what I have done with the income approach is to try and reflect the same market period I have to do for the sales ratio analysis. And so to use the income from 1 year, from the most current year, and not try and stabilize that from the past 3 years, like we have to take the sales from, I think that really throws the two as a check and balance out the window. Just throwing that out for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hirschfeld. again, I would,
I don't feel that 30,000 a unit is a fair value, nor do I think that 60,000 is a fair value, but I think it's getting close at 60. But 50, to me, is probably just a little bit on the high side of an average value, $50, 50,000 a unit. In this case, it put his value at 600,000 at 50,000 a unit. Now, the thing we got to be careful of, if we adjust this at 50,000 a unit, does that create a domino effect for everyone we look at tonight at 50,000?
I don't think so, Mr. Steiner. I think you have to look at the age, you have to look at location. I think each one of these properties are unique to themselves.
I agree. I agree that each
So-
property is unique, and in fact, that's how it's supposed to be. You take each property and you set it at its assessed value. I submit to you that with a direct comp that's identical, that was 30,000, that this property should be assessed at 360,000. And that does not affect what you set the other properties' values to. That we'll look at those individually, and you can make a decision on each one of them. And that's the proper way to do it, and I agree with that.
So,
And Mr. President, we do take the uniqueness of every property into account. And my concern is like Commissioner Steiner's, certainly, and this is at your discretion too, if, you know, you don't think the 10% to structure that I gave this year is enough, you know, by all means, you know, do we want to add more to it? Do we want to make it 20? Do we want to make it 30%?
no, was it 10 or you referred to as 16.8?
Yes, it's down. You went up 200%. You're reducing it.
Okay, so you're-
16.88 to be exact.
From the high?
From the high.
Okay.
It's
So
down
you
16.88.
took it 10 this year.
10 to
2
the
years,
structure.
from
yeah.
2015 to 2017. In other words, if you take those and you start bringing it down, it went from, what was the number? 842, and then you bring it down. It works out to be around 16.88%, I believe is the number.
But
So you went up 200, you're bringing it down.
Correct.
My opinion is that if we want to adjust apartments, I really don't have a problem if we want to go stronger than I went this year. Because in my opinion, it's really warranted if we're going to do it to all of them, because our valuation model is set up to make it equitable with other like properties. So if he's got one 12-plex at 700,000, there's another just like it somewhere else
Right.
who's not sitting here. And the issue we run into, though, is if we make too large of a decrease, we fall outside of that lower end tolerance range. At which case, we can certainly go to state at, say, 85%. But at the state's whim, then, they can come in and either accept that 85% and say, all right, we corrected for the apartments, we're going to let that valuation ride. Or they're going to say, you know what, no, you know the lower end tolerance is 90%, we're going to raise you back to 93%. And I've seen that happen. And the end result of that is an increase to everybody else. That's not warranted either at this time. But it's certainly an option that's before us.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr. Steiner.
I don't agree with the 30,000 per unit. I mentioned 60. That might be on the high side. 50,000, I feel is right there, but in this market, I think we could get that done for 45,000 a unit. With that in mind, I would make the motion to change the market value from 30,000 per unit to 45,000 per unit.
From their 30,000, what they're saying.
On what they're saying, yeah. So
Now, before there's a second, I want to throw this out there, what Mr. Hirschfeld just said, to be equitable to everyone. And we do have multiple properties on the agenda tonight. So if we maybe would come to the agreement that Mr. Hirschfeld could go back in and adjust that within the tolerances, then what's the time frame that we could give Mr. Hirschfeld, and we could still make the rolls to submit it to the Stark County? What are we looking at? Because I'm thinking we're just gonna hear the same argument over and over. So If Mr. Hirschfeld, if we feel as a commission that maybe, like Mr. Hirschfeld said, instead of 10%, he takes it to 20% or 15%, whatever in that ratio, to make it within the tolerable range that the state doesn't come in here and start monkeying with our valuations. That's what I fear. And then we could have this discussion again at a regular meeting. What's the time frame, Mr. Kessel? Or I guess, Mr. Hirschfeld, you would know too, when it has to be submitted.
The State Board of Equalization, or the state, I'm sorry, the county's Board of Equalization meeting is I believe, the second Tuesday in June. So really, we'd have to do this week and present it for Monday's meeting, unless we wanted to hold a separate meeting outside of next week's meeting.
Is that doable?
It certainly is. The adjustment I can make to apartments is very easy.
Okay.
I would rather see, instead of a case-by-case
Right.
basis, I would rather see you take a broad brush stroke so that everybody is,
Well, so across the board, like you know,
because rent's mandated by the market, the sales,
Right.
properties mandated by the market, so why wouldn't we correct the entire market instead of doing it on a
See, I
property
agree
by
that
property basis?
if there's others, that the correction should be made in the mill rate, not in the assessed valuation. The assessed valuation should go to market, and then the mill rate gets adjusted when you take your
Yep.
taxable amount into the budget.
Yep.
Because and you have it's absolutely, you've drawn the correct conclusion, is because I'm going to go through 3 more properties, and they're all identical as far as, I can show you that the rents, for instance, on Century,
And I looked at you're basically tossing 30,000 on almost all your properties, about
well,
correct?
because that's the
Yeah.
market.
Right.
That's the market. So, yeah, I used that number, and
Right.
again, if you take the cap rate, it confirms that that's the market. 7% comes out exactly. 354,000 on Century, for instance, in 2009, it was assessed at 3,800,000. The market says today 3.6. The cap rate says it's 3.8. Those numbers are all the same. It's 3,800,000. We're right back to 2009, and the income is back to 2009. My income went from 900,000 to 1,000,008. It's back to 900,000.
I think we understand, Mr. Royal. I mean,
I just have one question.
Yes.
If you took 3-year average income and applied that cap rate, where would you be at? Instead of just, because obviously it would be the difference if your rents were the high of the market and we brought you up. You can't use the high and the low. So let's say you took 3 years average revenue.
If I took, I'd have to. I have those numbers. I could do it. I just.
I'm guessing it's more than 354 because your rents have declined.
Yes, because it's gone down every year.
Right.
So and it started in the decline started in 2013. So you'd have two years of declining rents. You'd have 3. I've lost 100% of that. In basically since 2015, it's okay.
Roughly what's your
Yeah.
occupancy?
So it might be up. You might be up to maybe, as you're saying, 45,000 a unit. That'd probably be, in other words, 450,000. It might cap out at. Like I said, I can do those numbers. If you want to have somebody else come up, I might be able to look it up and
Mr.
do it. It
Frederick,
doesn't take much for me to do those numbers. I have them. I'm more than happy to.
Sure.
I have submitted all the numbers every time Joe's office for 20 years. If they've asked me for income, I'm not like the other guys. I send him all the income, all the expenses, and they're all the numbers because I have professional management. We just take the numbers and give it to them.
Sure.
This is it. So one of the things.
Mr. Hirschfeld had a comment.
Yeah.
so.
and I have that answer for you right now. It's in the book there. If you take a 3-year running total of that, all but one of his properties is under assessed right now, using the income approach. And that's where my prior comment about being careful about going just off the income approach comes into play, that if we'd have looked at just the income approach over the last 5 years, his properties have been undervalued by a significant amount.
Well, what I would, and this is just, I guess my guidance would be that we would send this back to Mr. Hirschfeld, because we're gonna argue this over all these properties. And then hopefully you can rectify it by Monday night.
I can. The one clarification I want on the directive is it to stay within the 90% tolerance, or are we looking at a value
I would
close to
say
the
stay
market?
within the tolerances.
Stay within the tolerance.
I don't want, like I said, I don't want the state in messing with,
But just to clarify, so if we use a 7% cap rate and do that 3-year average, you're telling me he would be assessed at higher than 775 right now?
I use a gross income multiplier because cap rates can be manipulated with the data that's presented. And so I just looked at the sale price by the gross income, and I have quite a bit of data that supported an 8 on these older properties. And so I just took the gross income and divided that by 3 over the last 3 years and multiplied that by an 8.
and then my question to Mr. Kessel is, how heavy is the agenda Monday night for this coming Monday?
President Decker, we don't have the agenda completely compiled yet. We will have a couple timetables, but I don't believe it will be as extensive as our last
And
one.
these would be timetable items,
Yeah, we would make these.
timetable, okay. I guess I would look for a motion then to allow Mr. Hirschfeld to adjust these, to be within the tolerances, the state tolerances. Now we can, if you don't feel that's right, we can go ahead and deny too, or adjust right tonight, so.
I'd make that motion. And let Mr. Hirschfield review it.
I would second that.
So we have a motion and a second to have Mr. Hirschfeld reassess these, is that correct terminology?
That would be correct.
Reassess these apartments. Now, are we gonna do, we're gonna do all the apartments then, right?
You're
Because
gonna
that-
do citywide.
Citywide.
That is correct. All
Right.
the apartments are under one umbrella, so.
Okay.
I can make an equal adjustment to all of them at the same time.
Okay.
Okay.
We will still, whoever's on the agenda, if they still wanna come forward and they don't feel that that's,
Can I make one
Okay.
comment on that? Is that if you're using it with some tolerance that you have to keep with the state, then you're not assessing my property at its fair market value.
that's what we have to deal with.
Yeah,
We have to, by law,
yeah.
so.
That's what I'm saying, is by law, it has to be assessed at its fair market value. And not, you have to meet some number that keeps the state from coming down and saying, hey, you guys need to change this.
Well, ultimately,
If
Mr.
state-
Royal,
yeah, yeah.
Mr. Royal, ultimately, if we don't make the right decision and the county doesn't make the right decision, they will adjust us.
Yeah.
They will move that value. So we have a motion to send these totals back with a second to Mr. Hirschfeld.
And I have one question, and because this is different than any place I've ever been, is that in most states where you protest your tax, is you're only talking about that property, not everything within the city. So it's kind of like buying an airplane ticket on United. If you don't ask for the discount, you don't get it. That's the way all the other states that I own property operate. Now, I understand what you're doing. I'm listening to it, and it may be really fair, but I'm just saying that as you're making an adjustment across the board, is that in most states, you go in and you're only talking about one thing, the property that you and I are talking about, and it should be adjusted to its fair market value. And that's the way I understand North Dakota law is, even though you have some restraints, he does, so that the state doesn't come in and monkey with your numbers, and you say they will. Well, we don't know that. If you adjust my property, it should not affect anybody else's, especially if they're not here complaining.
And that's where I brought up discussion of whether it's
Yeah.
gonna have a domino effect.
Yeah. And
Certainly
see,
is.
Yeah, and it does if you make it a domino effect, but it doesn't if you don't. In other words, this body is, my understanding is between.
I may interrupt you just
Yeah.
for a minute, because here's what we're about to do. We're
Yeah.
about to vote on this to make it fair and equitable across the board.
Right.
For more than just you.
I agree.
If you keep pushing the issue, then I will take my second back, and we will just make the motion to deny your request.
Yeah,
and
I
it will be
understand.
done.
I
And
understand. I
That
will
is,
not-
as
yeah.
you keep talking, that is what you are risking at this point, is we, as a board, want to make a fair and equitable arrangement for not only you, because we have heard your case, but we want to relook at it across the board.
Understand.
Okay?
Mhm.
Okay.
So my second for Mr. Frederick's motion stands right
Okay. No further discussion. We'll vote. Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
now. Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
No.
Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Chair votes no, but the motion does pass. Now, all your properties, Mr. Royal, are apartments, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we will move
Yeah,
on.
Yeah, I agree that
Okay.
there's no need to go through the others.
Okay.
That if
Okay.
you've heard one,
Okay.
basically they're all the
Okay,
same.
well, thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks for taking your time.
Next up is Dickinson Meadows.
Mr. Chair,
And-
just for point of clarification, there was a motion on the floor that I believe you had discussion before a second was made. I just want to make sure that technically it dies, but just because there was discussion in between, is that motion rescinded?
No.
The previous one? Not just this last one, but there was one right before that?
One I made,
Yes.
I'll withdraw that.
Thank you.
Okay. Dickinson Meadows is an apartment also, okay? Is there a representative from Dickinson Meadows here? Being none, I guess they will fall under that, what we just had a motion for. I know this next property is not apartments, Dan Porter Motors. Is there a representative from Dan Porter Motors here? Mr. Porter is seeking,
Mr. President,
yes,
do we still not have to address Meadows, even if they're not here? I mean, they're asking for an abatement, do we not have to?
Well, Commissioner Snyder, you have addressed them based on the motion you made previously, because
Right.
that will affect all
All-
of these. Do they need to make a motion specific if that's the adjustment? Because now, once that adjustment's made, there'll be a different number that will be provided to them, and then they can come at a,
Monday night.
correct.
So,
Okay.
Ms.
well,
Kripe?
As long as the record shows that I voted no on that, then we're okay.
Ms. Kripe?
Yeah, I
Is that
believe-
okay?
Yeah, I believe the motion
Okay.
was to essentially table the rest of the apartments while that revaluation is done across the board.
Okay. Unless we have an apartment owners here that want to come up and, okay. Mr. Porter is, he is seeking revaluation because of his rental property, am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Porter did come to my office. He said he would be here. He did not mention a value. He did not provide me with one, so I don't believe we have to take any action at this time.
We have the same sheet you have right there, so.
Okay.
I guess I would look for a motion to,
Mr.
well,
President.
we don't really have anything to
Yeah.
adjust to.
Yeah, based on the information, his income stream has not been affected in the last few years. It looks like it's about the same. I'd move we deny the abatement request.
Okay, we have a motion to deny Mr. Porter's request
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Moving on. And I have the sheet here, new sheet. And you said that indicated next on your sheet is it Roar's property?
Roar's
I don't-
Properties, yes.
Okay, I don't have the updated. And is there a representative from Roar's? There is. Yes, we do.
I am Sarah West. I'm the CFO over at Roars. So we're gonna go through 5 different sections of property. So I kind of clumped them based on where they're at in the city. So the first page here is raw land.
Okay, and are you still wanting to discuss your apartments?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, we'll deal with the raw land first.
Okay. So these are 2 parcels. They're just east of Menards. As you can see, the valuation from 2014 to 2015 increased on one parcel by 142%, and on the second parcel by 156%. At this time, Menards already existed. There is no increased value to those parcels. And next Monday, you'll be hearing from our attorneys on the abatement process, but we still wanted to represent on the assessment side as well. So that's why I'm here this evening as well. So you'll hear this song and dance again next week. But there hasn't been any improvements in this development since 2013. So we are asking that the value be dropped back to the 2014 number.
And that is the property that is, the first one you're discussing is located directly west of Buffalo Wild Wings, in the red.
Yes.
Mr. Hirschfeld, would have you any comments on this property?
In regards to these properties, my comments will be very similar for the improved lots. They were part of the commercial revaluation that we had. I mean, the IAAO says to do that every 5 to 7 years. This was part of that. Certainly the environment has changed and maybe the market has. Again, vacant lots like other properties, you know, if they've been negatively affected, and certainly if construction has decreased, at least the time frame of when they sell, maybe not for what they sell for, but if you discount that value due to extended marketing period, I mean, there's a case to be made there. But the question is, does that fall outside of what a revaluation is, or, you know, are they basically asking us to revalue city land again? You know, we just did that, and we paid a tidy sum for that. And you know, in regards to this property, if we make an adjustment to these outside of a revaluation of all city land, then we'll probably be looking at additional property owners coming in looking for something similar. And therein lies the issue we have with the sales ratio analysis. Is you've just asked me to adjust apartments down, but if we make any adjustments to land, then we'll have to do that before I can adjust the apartments. So we'll be possibly taking value away from the decrease to apartments if we make any further adjustments. Just keep that in mind moving forward.
Any questions for Mr. Hirschfeld, or is it Ms. West?
Yes.
Ms. West. On the commission.
Approximately, how much per square foot is that piece of property?
Ooh, I did not do that math on this parcel, but it is probably, going off memory, I look at numbers all day, $6 per square foot. The Menards lot sold for $4 per square foot.
Okay.
And it's programmed to sell to a big box store, like Target would be ideal.
And to throw out another option.
Don't start rumors.
Right? They are not interested at this time.
To throw out another option to the board, since we are meeting about these same properties at the abatement next week, if there's any questions that you have, we can certainly, you know, address what the questions and concerns are, and then have those answered for next week as well, and take no action tonight.
I think that would make the most sense. It doesn't seem best use of time to debate it tonight, only to re-debate it on Monday night.
I guess whatever the commission's wishes are, so.
It would be beneficial for us to go through the properties briefly so
Yep.
that you
Oh,
guys can go
definitely. Yep,
generate your questions, and then we're prepared for
Yep.
Monday.
yep, that's fine. But no decision on, we'll see.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we're looking at, right now, we're looking at parcel 41250505, am I correct?
Yep, and then
Okay.
the one right to the east of that as
Which had a
well.
valuation of $2,053,000 in 2014.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions, comments for Mr. Hirschfeld or Ms. West on this property?
So our values come up, I mean, obviously this is not an income generating property, so we're using comparable sales. Is that how we come up with their value?
Comparable sales were used at the time of the reassessment in 2015. Certainly, we've had fewer sales, but we'll see coming up here in the next few lots that they did successfully sell a lot here in the past few months, and it sold in excess of assessed value. Whether you can correlate that down back to this one here or not, we certainly were fairly assessed on that one. We were under assessed to the sale price. Again, the argument's then made to the discount for time, and if we should be incorporating that at the time in 2015, that wasn't warranted. Properties were selling quickly. And so this question is best addressed by a revaluation that we fortunately completed, in 2015. The unfortunate side of that to the property owner is at the top of the market. Well, to be looking at that again, we're maybe making the same mistake doing it at the bottom of the market. With this dynamic market, it's difficult to try and pull out what is the value of this property. If they hold it for a year or two, they may get that $6. If it takes them 10 years, well, it certainly wasn't worth that $6 when you account for time value money.
And holding costs are a consideration. If you have been out to the Westridge development, we did put a significant amount of dollars into the infrastructure, and we do have significant holding costs, especially when our real estate taxes, our liability at Roars is nearly $1 million. So there are significant holding costs for holding these as well. That should be taken into consideration if we're gonna do that. And I can get those numbers for you for Monday too.
So we have one suggestion from one commissioner to possibly table this till more information can be gathered, since we will be discussing an abatement on this. Am I correct, on Monday night?
Correct.
Mr. President, I have one question. Mr. Kessel, with Roars, do we go into a partnership to get the water and sewer out there from underneath the interstate?
When it came to infrastructure development, they put in the majority of the water and sewer that exists within that development. To get underneath the interstate, we had to bore that, and there was a $500,000 expense that we did partner with Roars
I
on.
thought it was 800 and we paid 4, but no?
That's what I understand as well.
8 and 4?
That we were supposed to get 8 and you have paid 4.
Yeah, that
So-
might be,
Okay.
that was several years ago, so we can go back and get those numbers specifically, but yes, there was a partnership with Roars to provide water and sewer, not only to this development, but essentially to get under the interstate from the south to the north.
Mr. Hirschfeld, just for the public record, I don't know what goes out on the TV, but could you get your assistant to pull this property up so it's...
Absolutely. Jeremy, they're asking for the Westridge development and that parcel to the east of Menards.
Do you want me to go through my logic on the next piece?
While he's finding that, you can.
Okay, so the next piece is Westridge First Edition, Block 2. So there's the parcel, which is similar to the Google map I have on your guys' handout.
And that's
as
the
well.
yellow block, just for our reference?
No, the red and yellow block were on the same page.
Okay.
Same argument
Okay.
there.
So the red block is the one that's across from the supermarket and across from your apartments? The one you want to discuss right now?
Yes.
Okay.
On the second page, yep. And has Cornerstone up in the corner, and
Okay.
I think that's the only lot that's actually been built on. So on page 3, I have the plat for you and prices per lot that's been assessed on there. We did sell the black lots in January for $11 per square foot, so I used that and the desirability to determine the prices of the other lots. So the yellow lots on top, I took the $11 per square foot at a 20% discount. 15th Street has nothing to go to, so that's not a desirable location at this time for businesses. The red blocks would be similar desirability, given that there's a road through there, but through the backside of Cornerstone Bank. to the lot sold, so at $11 per square foot. And then the corner piece, that would be right when you turn into the development, if you're headed to Family Fair. That I put a 33% premium on. So if we use the $11 per square foot, which was very close to the assessed value, and then adjusted the price based on desirability of the other lots in that block, that's the logic that we were going with on this particular parcel or area.
And they're currently assessed at, oh,
Down here is the assessed value, so lot 16 is assessed at 1.2. I'm asking it to be at 600,000. Lot 17 is 1.2, asking for 600. Lot 14 is 1.3, asking for 827. Lot 12, 1.4 almost, asking for 863. So the variance, it's not a percentage, we use the math, yeah. Any other questions on block two?
Any questions on block 2? Okay, we have that property up. I just wanted that up just so if it's on TV so people know what
Yeah.
we're referring to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any questions on block 2, Ms. West?
Nope, I don't have any questions.
okay.
So the third piece that we would like to talk about is Westridge Second Edition. In Mr. Hirschfield's letter to you guys that was dated May 5th, it talks about an error of approximately 15 million was corrected in regards to vacant lots where data provided to the assessing department turned out to be incorrect, resulting in vacant lots being overvalued by lack of existing infrastructure. When we got, this actually was on our 2016 bills, so we paid these under protest and are asking that we look at these lots or list of lots again. So in 2015, the cumulative lots were valued at 46,200. In 2016, they were valued at 21,162,000. And then once this was uncovered and the $15 million adjustment was made, the lots are now valued at 7,406,700, coming from that 46,200. Now, the reason or what triggered this reevaluation is that a plat was filed. So the city asked for the Westridge First Edition has some residential lots, and they asked for us to show another exit outside of that residential area to show that there's another way to get out. So that's when we designed Westridge Second on paper. There's nothing has been done to that. We're actually going to be, not we, but somebody's going to be planting alfalfa there this year. So I actually have a question with that. Can we unplat it and turn it back into ag land?
Why not? I think you can. There's nothing happening out there, correct?
And there's been a second, so 15th Street was since developed.
Se-
So there is that second
But there's no
exit for,
sewer, water.
there's no sewer, water, roads, anything to this development at all.
I think that's a good question that I'd like to involve Planner Hadley in. I'd like to get his thoughts on that, because there may be things we're not considering. It may be a possibility, absolutely, but I think we want to make sure that we walk through fire, police, and the rest, just to make sure that we're covering all our bases. But absolutely, I mean, technically, yes, that can happen. We can actually de-annex property, and we've asked owners to do that as well. So.
Okay.
Has that piece been annexed?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to,
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering, has it been annexed though, do you know?
No.
It has not, okay.
So this is outside the city boundaries.
That is incorrect.
I don't
It
know.
has been annexed.
It has
Don't
been
have to be
annexed?
for it to be platted and valued in the city.
Okay.
It has been annexed?
Yes.
we don't, yeah, I would agree with Mr. Hirschfeld.
So I mean, technically, if they're gonna do that, they'd wanna de-annex it probably. If they're gonna turn it back to ag, I'd imagine, right?
That's a question we can pursue when we look at the plating.
We don't have to accept the de-annexation.
No, we don't,
Yeah.
but
And that's Mr. Hadley, you said?
Yes,
Okay.
planner, yep, planning director Hadley.
Mr. Hirschfeld,
Yes.
you agree with these numbers right here?
When she makes the request, she does to pull the plat on that. It would go back to ag land value, and that's probably more reflective what an ag land valuation would be. However, as it sits as a platted parcel, it does not meet ag land criteria, and these are not market values. The ag land valuation is based off of NDSU's complex formula of cap rates and income and all of that, so it's
So unless it goes back to ag land, you wouldn't, these are not the numbers.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
So the ones in the tan there
Are
that's
the assessed value, 7 million, right?
with his adjustment.
With the adjustment.
Correct.
Your valuation is 7.4 million.
Yes.
Okay. So when it was ag in 2015, it was 46,000.
Yeah, yeah. And I haven't received anything confirming that the 7.4 would be the highest that we
Okay.
would be, you know, a reassessment.
and what was the error we found? I mean, 15 million? I mean,
We were led to believe with plats, and we got the as-builds, which we just corrected with engineering, that water and sewer had been strung throughout that subdivision. And so the value that added to it was added to these parcels. And so once it was found out from the as-builds that it wasn't, then we removed the value that contributed.
Okay, what commissioners desire on these properties from mowers?
I can contact Mr. Hadley in the meantime so that we're prepared for Monday again. Is that
I think that would make the most sense, so
So-
that we know what direction we can go
we
with.
can?
Make the motion to table this, these parcels,
Yeah,
all three of them?
yes.
Okay. We have a motion to table the three parcels that were discussed
second.
with a second. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
All right,
Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Okay, you have some two apartments.
Yes, there's actually, it's three legal entities. What Prairie Winds 1 and 2, that Mr. Hirschfield referred to when Mr. Royal was up here. Just so you're aware where the assessments are gonna line up. Mr. Hirschfield did make the comment that people won't necessarily pay a different price for a different building just because the occupancy is different, but that is not the case. People pay for the leases and the rents that are the income producing because it's an investment to them. So that's why there's the difference in between these two identical properties of just over $1 million and then 900,000. I did have somebody on my team email me the handouts today on my drive down because I work out of Fargo, and was looking through these denials, and the denials that Mr. Hirschfield was using to justify some of the assessments was the GIM of 8 to 10%. So even if we used that number, these properties would be cut into 50% or 25%. If you look at Prairie Winds, we have the last year, and the reason there's not 3 years is because these opened in 2015, in the fall of 2015. If we look at 2016, so the first full year of operation, and we take that number times 8, we would get 2.5 million versus the 4.1 that it's currently valued at. And if we look at Prairie Winds 2, which had gross revenues of 208,000, take that times 8, we have 1.7. So those, now that we have that data and one of those benchmarks, we'll be using that in our discussion next week as well. And then the third property would be Westridge. This is actually 4 buildings, 155 unit complex. So this is actually, if we were to reference this chart that Mr. Hirschfield used, this blue thing, it's really interesting and good information to have that we can have an older building and a brand new building, and that we don't actually generate that much more revenue. But our assessed value, it can be twice as much. So they aren't necessarily income producing properties right now. We are not making money at these properties. But even if we use the same 8% gross income multiplier on this property, and that's on the 2016 revenues, that's 9.2 versus the $23 million that it is currently valued at.
Any questions for Mrs. West or Mr. Hirschfeld? Any comments, Mr. Hirschfeld?
I believe she did her math wrong in using that gross income multiplier. I came up with the value of 16.8 to 21
Okay.
on the West Ridge. And it's difficult with the other two when, if we're stabilizing income based off of 3 years and you don't have 3 years, then that'll skew then the results on the other properties that are only showing 1 or 2 years income.
And we can give you projections out of 17 because we do that for all of our properties, and they're actually going to do worse in 2017 than they did do in 2016 unless something changes drastically.
What is your occupancy right now?
On Westridge, it's 52%. On Prairie Winds 1, it is 70%, and on Prairie Winds 2, it's 56%. The Prairie Winds buildings, Prairie Winds 1 is the essential worker housing. So that, and then Prairie Winds 2 just got approved for essential worker housing. So that's actually helped us fill up those buildings as well. The timing wasn't great when they came on the market.
I guess you do have a page in here that says 52 and 74% occupancy.
Yeah. And I don't know if this matters, but so we use like percentage of revenue to kind of align whether our expenses are off, because we have properties in other parts of the state, Wilson, Minot, and a lot in Fargo as well. You know, when your property taxes are 20 to 25% of your revenues, when it should be 8 to 10, that really makes it really hard to want to stay in this market and to make it work, because they don't cash flow at this time, so nobody wants to buy them either, so.
And you're coming on Monday night to it.
I will not be here,
Okay.
but
Your
my
lawyer
team
for-
will be, yep.
Desire of the commission. And by presenting these, I guess my question would be, what we did earlier with the other apartments,
Mhm.
you didn't feel that was,
Not sufficient.
I guess my motion would be to table it until we can see Mr. Hirschfield's revaluation of all the apartments. They can discuss it again on Monday.
We have to get some information from Mr. Hadley. It seems like we have been presented with a lot of information
Yeah.
to take in.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to reach a decision on this tonight based on missing pieces.
I agree.
So I would second that we would address all of this on Monday.
and just so we make it, that we're still on time, that's my concern, getting it to the county, so. So we have a motion.
We always discussed that this was gonna come up where, you know, with leg going up and his leg come down. We knew this was gonna be one of our nights. Unfortunately, when things turn around and go back up, I don't think they'll be coming back in and
Asking to pay more?
asking to pay more. So,
Right.
Okay, so we have a motion to table till Monday and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you.
And we have Mr. Hirschfeld, last property. We have one more.
I don't have any more.
Oh,
We do have another representative in the audience if he's willing to, wishing to step forward.
Okay. Jeff?
Well, I was specifically thinking of him here, so, but, well, we may have two.
Hello, my name's Kelly Peterson. I'm with First International Bank and Trust in Watford City, North Dakota. We are the owner-operator of Hawks Point, which is assisted living community on the campus of Dickinson State. We brought it back. We acquired ownership due to foreclosure because of owner not being able to make the regular debt payment. And so as of, I believe it was August, September, First International took control of Hawks Point. In all of our understanding, Hawks Point, and just so you guys know, Hawks Point has a main building, has 77 units. On the outside of that, there's some cottages. There's 4 duplexes in a single unit. And then the ownership then built on 14 more homes in the backside of it. So there's 25 units on the backside. And the prior ownership built those 14 units with the assumption that this property was tax exempt. For the first year, Hawks Point just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. So the first 10 years, there hasn't been any. Well, let me say one more thing. The main building, Dickinson State, has an agreement with Hawks Point, and they actually have classes in their building. So with those classes, with the understanding is that main building is tax exempt for property taxes. The other buildings, because there's no classes being held in there, just recently, just this year, were assessed. And so going back on the tax roll, years 1 through about 8, there was a property tax of about a $200,000 assessment. 2 years ago, the land then was assessed at a lot higher dollar amount to $1.4 million. And this year, the assessed value increase will go up $5.4 million. That was the initial assessment, and that's a 363% increase. And I asked Mr. Hirschfeld if what can we do? In his data that he presented to me, he did make a correction, and I think it had to do with zoning, if I'm not mistaken. But there was an adjustment that he made, which then reduced this assessment value about $1 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. So I guess my argument still is that some of the dollar amount that he used for the assessed values was still pretty high. And I'm going to reference, and I hate referencing these DSU properties, but on the assessed value, I have on my duplexes, he has them assessed at the starting value at about $312,000 a unit, where those fourplexes that we've talked about earlier, they sold for $272,000, and that's a fourplex unit compared to a twoplex unit. Mine's at $312,000. That sold for in between $250,000 and $270,000. Now, Mr. Hirschfeld gave us a discount for, I guess, again, there's something in the computer he told me, I can't remember what, but gave us a discount on that, and then because we're on leased ground, he gave us another discount. That brought it down to still about $160,000 a unit on those, and about 200 on average, about 220 on the 1 to 4 family properties. What my argument is, these are age restricted properties. You have to be 55 and older to be in these units. So it restricts the saleability. So when you start looking at comparable sales, how do you determine how many 55 and older people are buying homes? And some of his dollars that he started out on these 14 units that you see in here, his starting number was $325,000 to $340,000. That's a lot of money. And then he gave me my discount, and then he gave me the discount for being on leased ground, and I appreciate that. But I still think his starting point was too high. I mean, this land will never be sold. I can never parcel this out. This is on state ground that's been leased to DSU that is now here. There's nothing like this in the city. I mean, you can't have a comparable that's on the campus, leased ground, and so it's very difficult. And Joe and I had talked about this many, many times about what is the actual value and what is that actual adjustment that you can give. I mean, right now he doesn't provided me an educated, I shouldn't say it like that, sorry, a data supported that giving me 20% off is what the leasehold interest discount should be. He said we can argue that till we're blue in the face, but I guess my point being is I think that when I have houses that have sold for in the same, just in last year, for 240, 250, 260,000, and you're starting mine at 320, I just think that's a little excessive. So I looked at square footage. I didn't bring cap rates because we haven't owned that property that long to have a whole year full of data. So I did grab just some price per square footage, and if I can find it. And what I saw on the units that he provided me, the values, square footage price anywhere from 203 or 197 all the way up to $213 a square foot for these units.
And there, let me stop you right there on the square footage value. There's no basements in those homes, are
Yes.
they? There are basements in
Yep.
them? And are they finished?
And there's basements in these as well.
Are they finished?
Yes.
So you think 197 or 204 is high? for
I
square-
do,
for
and
a
the
finished
reason
basement?
I called some realtors, and I also talked to my banker friends, and their new construction price, brand new, is 190.
190.
190.
And I think these will probably bill for a little more than that back in the day.
Well, I don't have,
Yeah.
of course, we weren't a part of acquiring those at the time. However, some of these units have been there for 10 years, and just this year you're starting to tax me. I mean, what happened the last 10 years if it's been shoved,
Well, the last 10 years, you didn't pay any taxes to it.
Exactly, I agree with that. My point being is that this is on the campus of Dickinson State. The last point, because I see where you're going, is that you haven't been paying taxes, you should. I had him do a quick analysis as to what our property taxes would be in today's market. And we're paying about $14,000. This would jump it to about $63,000 is kind of the number that he guessed. That's a pretty big hit for any group, especially assisted living. We want to keep our costs down so we can pass that savings on to the people that are there. The last thing I just want to, so I guess my point being is, I think the square footage price, I didn't, like I said, bring in cap rates because I don't have that data. I think that what I'm asking for is I have an appraisal, that the team that did the appraisal last year wasn't able to get me the information in time to get it for this meeting, and they told me 45 days to get it to me. But they did an overall square footage of $107 a square foot. He's coming up with about 200 on average with the new buildings and about 160 on the old cottages. I guess my request, obviously I want no taxes because we're trying to keep costs down. But at the same time, I'd like to see that reduced down to maybe cut it in the middle where we're at about 150 to 160 a square foot. I think I'd be happy with that. My last argument, and maybe it's not an argument statement, is we do have an agreement with the college. And with that, every one of our residents is able to attend class, go to the library, attend a theater, and the main thing is attend class, and they can actually earn credits, and it doesn't cost them anything. So literally, you can almost count this as student housing. They're actually people that are students of the college. So I know that sounds funny. I saw some smirks, but at the same time, I'm age restricted. I can never sell it. I'm on the campus ground, state-owned property. I'm one lot, and I'm just asking to, obviously, with the agreement with the college, we're actually hiring all their. We have by having them being for us being students of their facility, we in turn hired their students back to do work-study programs. We got people in business management. We got young college students that are working at our facility to help out that whole facility. So it's a unique situation. It's a huge hit on 1 year, and And, you know, the whole understanding of building this was that it was tax exempt to begin with. And I don't think the original owners would have built these had they know that the taxes would have increased. They all went on an assumption for 10 years we've never been taxed, and now all of a sudden we're getting taxed. And I don't know if it has to do with a little bit with the change of ownership, if that spurred this, but we're just looking to have that reduced.
The one thing you didn't mention, I would agree with you that I think the rebuilding, the square footage cost between 160 and 180 is about where we're at today on that type of construction. So I'd agree with you, you know, somewhere in the 160, 180 range per square foot.
I'd be happy with that, if that was our starting point and we kept the same adjustments that we had in before.
Yeah. I mean, that's my opinion. At least you're,
It's very difficult because it's age restricted, it's never gonna sell.
yeah.
And we're trying to
Yeah.
keep our elderly,
Well,
because we don't want to pass those
One thing,
expenses
yeah,
on.
none of that affects the rebuilding cost on it or anything, but the materials there, if you want to call them subpar or not above par or standard or whatever. And that's why I say anywhere from 160 to 180 a square foot.
And granted, we have some nice properties, but I will also say that all these properties were brought in on mobile units and put on basements. And I've been in banking for 23 years, and I've never seen a modular unit sell for stick-built price. And these prices that I have in here are stick-built price, and I'm gonna say that the argument is that you have very nice modular units. However, I have another property that I'm trying to sell on a foreclosed property in Watford City, and once they saw it was modular, they dropped down.
Absolutely.
And the same property with Hawks Point, that whole main building was brought in. I don't know if you guys remember, it was craned in and pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle. And right now, when we're trying to sell this property, because we're bankers, we're trying to get out of this and get it to an assisted living company. First thing they say is it's modular. It's not worth what it is.
Yeah, this is one of the few presentations I agree with tonight.
I appreciate that. But I don't think I'll be back on Monday because I got other obligations, and I don't want to not be here because I don't want to be, because I'm not here, say, denied. So
Mr., any problem with the 160 to 180?
Off the top of my head, excuse me, I don't know what our square foot cost is. Just quickly, the initial valuation, and I had my appraiser go through and do these since they are residential. Hawks Point, and since it's valued as a vacant lot, because the main building itself isn't valued, it's valued at a 10% or the commercial rate versus 9% residential rate. And then what that ended up doing is it put our cost structure on the commercial side of that. So that was the correction we did. We priced it on a residential rate then. These properties are valued just the same way as every other property he'd go through in Dickinson. So I mean, the fact that they're modular, all that's already taken into account. And the quality of them, the fact that they're modular, I mean, we've already accounted for that. Now, we saw the sales of our 1940s, 50s, 60s year-old houses selling for $200 a square foot. And, you know, I don't know that I agree with going down to 160 on these new sales. Where we're at on these now, the duplexes, each half is worth $125,000 a unit. The high end of these is sitting at 218. I went through the MLS and did a quick search for properties built between 2010 and 2015 that sold for less than 220. I found 0. So we're already have these valued less than anything else similar to it has sold in the last year.
President Decker, I have a question. I just want to make sure that I heard you right so that we're all on the same page with regard to your request. I think I heard you say that you'd be happy with 160 to 180 plus the discounts that have been provided. Is that accurate?
correct. The starting point is, in my opinion, at 320 to 347, and then he gives me discounts off that. The
Correct.
starting point is the point, and then because I'm on lease ground, because you'll never sell these, is a discount, and then there was a commercial discount that I was going to get as well. And so they brought the total assessed value on most of these to about 260, and there's houses, single-family houses selling for less than that, and you own the land underneath it. So I guess my request is to lower that down a little bit farther, and
Right.
to kind of meet in the middle there a little bit.
I just wanted to make sure the commission was aware of that.
But when you say you'll never sell these, you did say that you're trying to get out of them.
You'll buy in leasehold interest. The state owns the land, and it's being leased to the college, which was leased to
Okay.
Dickinson
They
Investment.
won't sell them individually. It's all or not.
Correct. Well, the state would have to give us,
Yeah.
to sell the land to us, and we'd have to plot it out. It's 11 acres that will never change,
Yeah.
and it's a 99-year lease.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
And
But
so
you
that's the
sell
other,
the individual units, right?
pardon?
You do sell the individual duplexes to, or are you just renting?
You rent them, yes.
They're all rented, they're all leased.
And as you know, if you look at, I don't want to bring up the income approach.
Right.
But if you do, obviously, the last owners couldn't cash flow.
Right.
I don't know if you want to bring up the income approach on some of those units.
Pardon?
I don't know if you want to use some of those apartment units on the
Well, you gotta
income
look at the whole
approach.
package that's in there too. You got food, you got transportation, you got a lot of things that you could bring that number down.
Right.
I mean, that's our argument, or shouldn't I say, that's our presentation when people want to come in there. No
So,
more.
Mr. Steiner, when you say 160 to 180, I guess what I'm looking at is,
I'm thinking if you go to a modular manufacturer and you ask them to build that home, I think they're going to be able to do it for 160 to 180 mark.
now the difference in the square footage, my understanding, you said 197 to 213. Am I correct? What I wrote down?
Grab my sheet again. Let's see here. I got
Pretty sure
197
that's what,
and up to about 220 is the other one.
Okay, 220, I had 213, but, what is the difference to get the 197 between one cottage at 197 a square foot to the one that's at 220? I mean, is it that much more of a marketable difference in the cottage?
No, I mean, these are all basically built, I mean, pretty much the same, just like that one that's 220, that was 1,388 square feet, and he's got it assessed at 305. And the one that went to 197 was 1,697 square feet, and he's got that listed at 335.
I'm just thinking if these are very similar, they should almost all be the same. There shouldn't be a range, unless there's something inside.
Well, the only thing that might be different might be the size of maybe the decks that are on side, because he added the amenities, you know, like if it's a covered
Two
porch.
stall, one stall?
They're all
or
two-stall. I mean, if you go into that community, thank God they're colored different, because you'd think they're all the same.
Okay.
I would argue that it'd be hard to find any one unit worth more than 200,000 in that whole situation.
Well, I'm just
Well-
looking at the parameters you threw out there, 160 to 180. Maybe we're looking at like 170 or 175.
I don't know what
A hard number.
I don't know what the average age in Dickinson and Watford City, it dropped down to about 32, you know, so your sales mark,
Mr. Kessel knows that. It's 39, you said?
you know, so I'm age restricted at 55 and above, so my range of trying to sell it, if I could sell it, has squeezed considerably.
Do you know, when this property was pulled off the market, it was going to be for sale, and I know there were a couple bidders that were willing to throw in a bid, and then it was pulled off the market, if I'm not mistaken, and you decided to take it on, so to speak. Is that accurate? I know I was approached by two different people who said they were upset because it was taken off the auction block, because they wanted to buy it.
It wasn't taken off the auction. I think they misunderstood how the sale on this courthouse. See, we had a second lien on it. Dakota Bank had a first, and we were foreclosing on the second.
Okay.
And when they went in there to go to this courthouse steps and buy it, they didn't realize they were getting the second lien position. There was still somebody in front of them that had a debt in front of it. And so at that time, they had to back off because they didn't have all the facts, even though some of the buyers talked to me and I visited with them. And so at that time, we paid out the first, now we have the complete package, and now we're trying to market it. And the first four people that have come to us, they just, of course, it's not worth, when a bank has it, it's not worth anything. And then they start nitpicking and saying, these are modular units, and this is this, and this is this. And right now, we're running it until we can find an appropriate buyer. So right now, again, having gone from 14,000 is I think what we paid last year, at the very when he first said was going to be 76, and he backed it down to about 62.5, I think his email said, is what our liability would be, and that's a big hit to our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What is the commission's desire on this is Hawks Points,
Correct.
Right, Hawks Point.
Yes.
Can you make a taxable valuation at $170 square foot now, Joe?
Our system doesn't work quite like that, Commissioner Jackson. It's all, or I'm sorry, Commissioner Steiner.
That's all right.
Your wallet just got thicker.
You see, you're held in high esteem as well. We have table values that are set by sales. We have other modular units throughout the town. I disagree about the quality. I mean, you look at these properties, they're not like your manufactured house. They're not just one long rectangle. You've got some fenestration. I mean, you've got the garages on them. The only difference between a site-built house and a modular house is one of them is built in a climate-controlled building and delivered on site. So that the quality, there's no difference. And so I don't understand the concern about it being modular construction.
I
Certainly
think the
there-
composition of the shingles, I think the floorboards or whatever, the trim, I think that's where a lot of the differences are in a modular home and so on, you know, like, it's gonna be lighter weight shingles, it's, you know.
And I would add to that, if you and your family were looking at a stick-built house or a modular, you would pick the stick-built.
You'd notice the difference.
You'd notice the difference.
And I've seen some $400,000 modular houses before they were set. So, I mean, the quality was well above average. And again, we account for it being modular. We account for the shingles, the flooring, and the quality grade. So all of that's already taken into account. The concern here now is, you know, what's the least fee, the value of the least fee interest? And, you know, I had the data that I used, and right now I was waiting for an appraisal to show me if there's data that was different than what I had. That's the way the law, but the guidelines are anyway, that the assessor uses the information he has, and then the property owner then supplies something that's different with other support, and that's kind of what I'm waiting for.
Where are you at in the appraisal process now?
The CBRE is the appraiser, and I've basically the timeline, I didn't have a time, so I canceled it. There's nothing, I mean, at this point, I couldn't get it to the timeline. I think I was supposed to get it to them by last Wednesday. They couldn't get it to me. They're out of Minneapolis, and they needed 45 days to 60 days to get this completed. I mean, I just can't jump ahead of everybody.
And one of the things we like to look at is an appraisal, and if you don't have the appraisal, it's tough to make a decision. I don't know if we're gonna be able to make a decision on this then until next year, next year's round. Unless there's,
I mean, I was comfortable with it being every property there valued less than anything else that's sold. I mean, I don't know how
Well,
much lower you get to
yeah.
prove if you're accurate.
I'm looking at the numbers, I'm looking at what Mr. Steiner suggested at the 180 would be about, if I'm doing my math right, about 16% reduction.
And honestly,
If I'm doing my math right, there's probably people in here with better math skills than me, but,
And if I will, Mr. President, I don't have in front of me either if we're at 165 and you give me the directive to 180, or you asking me to increase it.
I'll just give you my thoughts on value. Stick-built pricing right now starts at about 190. Goes up to about 225 with the finished basement, without a lot. Obviously, they don't have a lot, so every argument you can make, a modular home will not bring as much money as a stick-built house. Plain and simple, period. I think these have vinyl siding on them, am I correct?
I think so.
Vinyl windows. The pricing I'm quoting is hardboard siding, Anderson windows. I mean, top quality product. They're not comparable. So I have a hard time with them at 220 because I just don't think that's the price range that they would be in. You put that anywhere else and put a stick built next to it, you're not going to get as much for that as you're going to get for the same thing stick built.
Maybe my recommendation, rather than waiting for an appraisal, is just to ask for that leasehold interest to be raised from 20% up to 40%. That would reduce this by about 40,000, which is about what I'm asking per unit.
Yeah, and then you take the uniqueness of, I mean, you have to sell them all as a one unit. I mean, you can't really just hodgepodge, sell one to this guy and sell one to that guy. So, I mean, you have to sell it to a group unless you're going to get the state to write individual leases to everybody, which I don't see that happening either.
Your tax, you're saying that you're at, what, 64?
That was just an estimate.
Okay.
That,
And you're actually asking for a reduction of like 40,000?
no, I was asked to reduce the assessed value of each
Okay.
house by another 40,000 roughly, which would get me down into about 200,000 per house.
Okay.
And that's with the uniqueness, and I that's at a minimum, but I'd like to ask for more.
Because
but
you're saying they're going 240 to 260 right now.
The assessed value after the discounts, yes.
So I understand the situation. When the foundation owned them, they were not taxable, so,
That is incorrect. They've been taxable since the moment they were set.
okay, then what?
The Attorney General's opinion, this goes back several years too, before I started here, they tried to assess the Hawks Point building itself. I mean, it is a for-profit building, and it competes against other properties in town. It just happens to be located on the Dickinson campus, and it's used that way from what I understand from past students. And so it had that draw to it. However, it does compete against like St. Ben's or St. Luke's, and which are taxed for the assisted living part, not the nursing home part of it. And so what they did here was, since it's located on DSU campus and they hold a class in one of the rooms, I don't know how often, I've had family there and I never seen a class held there. Now, I wasn't there all week long either. But because they hold a class there, then it was considered to be used as for educational purposes and got the same exemption then that Dickinson State itself gets. Now, because it was leased fee, made the land underneath it taxable. Now, these cottages here then, because they sit on that same land, but they don't hold a class in these cottages, they are subject to leased fee to the full value of that building.
So years 1 through 8, I think we were assessed $200,000, and I don't know if that was just the land underneath it. Year 9 and 10, that jumped to 1.4 million the last 2 years, and this year, some of these buildings have been there 10 years. Just this year, now we're jumping to all 25 of those units, and it increased. That's where my that's where I'm coming up to.
I don't believe any of these were built prior to 2012, because they were all put up after I started here in 11. And Mr. Kessel may know.
11 cottages were built in 2000.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
added
those have
on.
been here way before 2012.
Yeah.
No, there was, several existed prior, and then they added, I would assume your number's accurate of 11 more.
It was part of the original. I was part of the financing to the original part,
Okay.
and we got paid out. So I was very, very attuned to what they built.
Yeah,
Yeah, I live not far from there, and I know it was way before 12.
yeah, it was, yeah, because I got here in 9, and it was before that.
Okay, so we're back to what is the commission's desire?
If I,
The property owner has asked for a reduction of basically 40,000 per unit. Am I correct?
Correct.
from which number?
From he stated there's 240 to 260.
His original assessed value before the deductions is what I'm asking for a reduction on, and then from there, then we get a leasehold deduction and another deduction from there. So this 320 on some of these to 340, I'm asking for that number to be reduced.
Okay, from the 325 to the 340.
'Cause they're at 125 to 218 now is the top end. So we're knocking another 40 off of that is what I'm asking.
I think you need to throw the numbers in, that $170 a square foot, they're different size units. I think we need to figure that in there, see what they come out to be, and address it at that.
You have the ability to do that, Mr. Hirschfeld?
I don't know that we can get it spot on at $170. We get to adjust it at 1% increments. So, I mean, we can get it as close as we can.
Okay, I think that's fair.
I provided Joe with the dollar amount and then divide by the square foot, so he's got all of them where he's presently at. I provided that to him.
And that $170 a square foot, does that include the lease fee interest? I mean, is that where we want the final value of it,
Nope.
I guess?
I'm considering that the cost of the dwelling itself and only the dwelling.
So we'll have 10% for lease fee interest and the other 10% for
That's what the
multiple
number
buildings.
is. That's what I think you'd have to use.
I think the numbers you gave me was 20, 20 and 20, correct?
Right, 20% is what it took to change to convert it from a commercial cost manual to the residential side. So that's that 20%.
And then another.
So that gets it to the residential cost. And then after that, there's an additional 20%. 10% of that's the leased fee interest, which is what I'm finding other leased fee interests are in the area. And then I gave the 10% multi-property discount or adjustment as I have for some of the townhomes here that are on multiple lots. They're priced just like this, multiple residentials, but right now they're on one parcel. There's got to be a discount in order for somebody to pick them all up. When I made those adjustments, that was at 10%. So that's how I arrived at this. You know, if it needs to be something else, that's what I'm looking for in appraisal from an outside opinion to see if they've got any better data than what mine is. But that would keep it consistent with what I've done throughout the rest of town.
Okay?
So your motion would be to
To use the $170 square foot
plus,
plus the
20%.
leasehold and whatever percentages you mentioned there.
Okay.
okay, so we have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion?
This is an unusual animal. I hope no one
It
ever
is,
has to
right?
go through this again in the entire state of North Dakota. I think this is the right way to address it. At least we can address it now. It'll be at a base now, and if things change in the future, then we can adjust it off this base. But I think we're being fair.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Not, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Mr. Altmans?
Aye.
Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. All right, we have anyone else? Mr. Broughton, please come forward.
Hi, I'm Ted Broughton. I own North Park, a manufactured housing community, and I have 3 things on my agenda, and they're going to be quick because I know you want to go home and eat, same as I. I didn't know I was supposed to talk to you and get on the agenda, or I'd have had a great presentation. So the first thing was, one of the things is Mr. Joe Hirschfeld is a neighbor and a friend, and I came here partially to defend him in case we had a lynching, or at least hold his jacket. And it doesn't look like we're going there. So the second one is I've got a mobile home park, and you guys are in the same position as the bank. Everybody wants to get into your pockets, and I'm no exception. But I think I can talk to Mr. Hirschfeld and get a better idea. And I also have some other property that a few years ago, there's a dedicated street that goes, I have property on either side of a dedicated street, but it was never finished. And from the city, I talked him into abandoning it, and the reason being is all the water from the street runs down that dedicated street and cut across my property, and it was causing all kinds of damage because there was a lot of water, and then end up flooding the sewer lift station in the corner. And I don't know if you remember, it was about 2-3 years ago, because you don't abandon streets very often, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct, we don't.
Yeah, yeah. And so, but it wasn't a gift. What I ended up doing is, if I didn't do it, the city was going to have to, because it was causing all kinds of problems for the lift station and for me. And I ended up spending like $50,000 to adjust it so it went down a natural drainage that was coming from the other street. And now that that is my property, it's really not usable property, but I'm being taxed as though it is. And I really need to sit down and show you, and I'm, I don't want to take a lot of your time, but, I'll come back.
No,
And
that would be my suggestion, is sit down, Mr. Hirschfeld. He's a pretty good guy. He'll listen to you.
no lynching tonight, so it was a great night.
Sort of.
Yeah, well, a little bit long. You know what? I want to tell you guys, thank you. It's a tough position to be in. And, some of you rode the way up, and it was hard because everybody was demanding, I want to build, I want to build, I want to build. And everybody's like, I can't sell, I can't sell, I can't sell. So you're doing a great job. And I, as a taxpayer, I'm in favor of what he's doing. Actually, get it sold, and then tax the next guy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Broughton.
You may have forgotten, Mr. Broughton, we record these, so they're available to that next guy.
Well, I can come talk to me.
Okay, we will move on. We're done with the properties. Is there any property needs to be added, Mr. Hirschfeld?
I do have one property that needs to be added. I do not have that prepared for this evening, so I can bring that forward next week as well.
Okay. As per instruction here, no reduction after the session of this board. Since we are carrying over multiple properties, that we don't have anything extra that we need to do with that motion-wise until Monday night.
Correct.
Okay.
My assumption is that when we get those numbers, that those are the true numbers that Mr. Hirschfeld is coming up with.
You lost your mic.
Next Monday, it would be, my eyes, is that we accept those numbers from Mr. Hirschfeld, because we've adjusted, we've listened, we're gonna go back and take another look at them. Last thing on Monday night I wanna do is come in and have the same discussion again for a half an hour and arrive at nothing.
Right.
So, I was happy with the numbers that were shown to us tonight. I think we're on the right track again. I don't think many of them are gonna need to be tweaked that much. But it's gonna be my recommendation that we follow the advice that you have given us and the numbers that you have given us.
And I'm hesitant, still on the clock here, to comment, but just my knowledge of what I've done in the adjustment that we made to apartments. I'm ballparking. Of course, we've got several things we're doing here, but I'll be able to make another 10% to structure adjustment to apartments. It's going to be another 8.5 decrease to the property value. It's not going to appease as many of them as you heard tonight. So, you know, giving you another opportunity, and that's, I'm completely comfortable with stopping at that value. Hesitant to drop below that 90%.
I agree.
So-
I think most of the board agrees with
Yep.
that. So,
too.
we have one more item that we need. We have an exemption applications, and the list was provided to all commissioners. Is there any questions on the attachment, the exemption? If not, if we find the exemptions to be correct and pleasing to the board, I would look for a motion to approve the exemptions. We have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? Not, we'll vote. Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Ms. Jennings?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Friedrich?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. I would look then for a motion to adjourn. So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.